Hey everyone, and welcome to the video today. And in today's video I'm going to be talking about a breakdown video or analysis in regards to the new Final Fantasy VII Rebirth trailer that we got at the 25th anniversary showcase. So let's get right into it. So starting off, we're going to go into massive spoilers about Final Fantasy VII's original story. So if you don't want to know anything regarding the original story of Final Fantasy VII, if you're still playing it, feel free to duck out this video, play the game, then come back right here. So going right into the trailer, we start off with a sort of overhead look of the ending of Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is essentially Zack in the alternate timeline saving Cloud and walking towards Midgar. We then get a sort of voiceover from Aerith saying, "What we have done is set in stone. The past is the past, but the future can be rewritten." This is a reference to the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, where the Avalanche crew have effectively changed the story from the original Final Fantasy VII release on PS1, because we know that the remake timeline has effectively diverged, because they essentially at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake you defeat the Arbiters of Fate, thus changing the events of history. They are now going off onto a new storyline, so we don't actually know where the story is going to go from here, which is quite exciting. Then we get a shot of Meteor hitting Midgar. Obviously this is Sephiroth's main plan in the original, which was to summon Meteor to destroy the planet. We then get a sort of title card shot of what will become of the planet. This is a sort of teasing us for the story of Rebirth, because we don't know what's going to happen to Midgar in regards to summoning Meteor. We don't even know if Sephiroth is going to summon Meteor. I imagine he kind of has to, because that is such a pivotal story moment in the original Final Fantasy VII, so we're going to have to wait and see. Speaking of which, we get our first shot of gameplay, which is Cloud and Sephiroth walking together in a sort of woodland area. Now, I think this is possibly the Nibelheim flashback scene. So essentially, after the gang get to Calm, the sort of town of Calm, which is essentially what happens directly after Midgar, Cloud gives them a flashback or retelling of events of what happened in Nibelheim, where he basically is a soldier and meets Sephiroth for the first time. Obviously, if you'd played the original Final Fantasy VII, you'd know that these events are actually false, but I'll go into that a bit later. Next up, this takes me right into the point of, will we see a playable Sephiroth? Because when we can see the gameplay here, we can see a waypoint showing that they've got over 1,000 meters to travel. We have a command deck in the bottom left, which is slightly different from how it is in Remake. With Remake, it had sort of the blue sort of Mako outline, whereas in Rebirth it looks like it's sort of more transparent and blacked out, maybe to sort of hide the HUD a bit more, blend it more in with the gameplay. But this takes me into our next bit. On the HUD in Final Fantasy VII Remake, you have the party in the bottom right. That is not shown here. I think that has been intentionally taken out of the gameplay to hide the fact that we will be having a playable Sephiroth in this flashback scene, because this flashback scene is essentially Shinra and soldiers and Sephiroth going towards Nibelheim, going towards the reactor, where then Sephiroth betrays them and essentially wants to reunite himself with Jenova, which is obviously his mother. We then get another title card shot of what is Sephiroth's endgame. Obviously in the original story we know it's Black Materia, summoning Meteor and reuniting with Jenova. We get a voiceover from Cloud essentially stating that Sephiroth's endgame is reuniting himself with Jenova and ruling over the planet, which we know to be false, because we know that Sephiroth's main goal is sort of to destroy the planet. As when in the final boss of the original, obviously Sephiroth, if you lose, Sephiroth completely essentially just wipes out the solar system, which in my eyes is still the best final boss in a video game, but that's a whole nother video right there. We then get a voice line saying, from Cloud saying, "I saw you lying there, I figured it was too late." We have another voice line from Tifa then saying, "What are you implying, that I'm an imposter?" This is essentially me. I think Cloud is sort of conflicted with himself over the flashbacks, because in the original we find out that Cloud, suffering from Mako poisoning, is effectively he's gone into shock and he's having essentially fake flashbacks where his memory has been intertwined with Zack's, because most of these events have actually been played out by Zack, because we know that Cloud isn't actually a soldier, he's just a sort of main sort of Shinra gunman, whereas obviously Zack Fair is a soldier and basically did all these events with Sephiroth in Nibelheim, obviously seeing Tifa's dad being killed, etc. Maybe this is Cloud sort of asking Tifa that are these events real, and Tifa denying it, because obviously, as we know in Final Fantasy VII later on, Cloud confronts Tifa, and Tifa says like, look, I'm sorry, these were all actually fake, I just didn't know how you'd react if I told you the truth, that sort of thing. This is obviously a reference to obviously Crisis Core and the backstory that we see in Final Fantasy VII, so it's cool that we'll see this sort of delved into more detail in Rebirth. Next, we are shown Aerith praying for Holy with the materia obviously falling out of her hair. Obviously, I actually don't want to spoil this, because if you haven't played the original, all I'm going to say is this is like, I'd say, the second biggest moment in the story, so it's cool that they're showing this here, but again, I don't know if these events with Aerith are going to sort of play out in the original. In Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, we don't know if these are going to play out the same way. Next up, we have a title card saying what is fact and what is fiction. Obviously, we know that with Final Fantasy VII Remake, the story has now diverted, it's changed. It's not going to follow the original events of Final Fantasy VII. So now that they're essentially doing a very Square Enix Tetsuya Nomura thing, where they're trying to say what is fact and what is fiction, what is real, what is fake. This could also be reference to the alternate timeline with Zack surviving. We don't know if that's real, we don't know what's going on with that, so that's pretty cool as well. Next up, we have a sort of parallel to the White Feather, where we have the White Feather falling down. Obviously, Sephiroth is the one-winged angel, obviously having black feathers, so this is obviously a parallel to that. But obviously, this is where we see Zack Fair essentially carrying Cloud to Midgar, which he does in the original story, but obviously then dies at the station. But Zack has actually survived the events of Crisis Core and is taking Cloud to Midgar in this new sort of alternate timeline. So that's pretty cool. Obviously, this was at the end game where the end credit scene from Final Fantasy VII Remake, where Zack gets to the church, and we don't know what he's seen. Is Aerith dead? Is she alive? We don't know. Speaking of which, we have Aerith saying the following: "I'm trying so hard to find you." And this could obviously be a reference to Zack, this could be a reference to someone else. We don't know if this is Aerith speaking in sort of the alternate Zack surviving timeline or the current timeline. We have no idea. But we also have another sort of voice line from Cloud saying, "Sorry, I feel like I failed you." Again, I feel like this is a reference to Zack, or it could be a reference to sort of the other Avalanche members that died in the story of Final Fantasy VII Remake. So again, we're not too sure. This trailer is sort of meant to be cryptic, to sort of, it's a teaser trailer, it's meant to be sort of making you think, is this real, is this not, who are they talking about, we don't know, that sort of thing. So it's nice to see that they are sort of getting us hyped for the story of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Speaking of which, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, we finally had confirmation, is the second part of a 3-part series. Obviously, we had Final Fantasy VII Remake, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and then we're getting a third part later down the line. So far, all we know is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is coming winter 2023, which is most likely obviously going to be December, unless it's delayed to 2024, which I hope not. But it's just really nice to see that they've actually given us a plan. We don't know if it's currently open world. Personally, I don't think it's going to be open world. Personally, from what the gameplay that they've shown off in this trailer, I think it's going to be linear with open areas, sort of like how it was in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Hopefully they show us a world map where we can select things. I don't think we're going to have a world map that we can fully traverse, but I'm hoping that we have like a static world map with pictures of locations or names of locations that we can select. Speaking of locations, I think we're going to see the following locations in part 2. In Rebirth, I think we're going to see Calm. Obviously, we have that confirmed. We've seen it in sort of the end credit scene of Intergrade. We know we're getting Calm for sure. I also do think we're going to get the Chocobo farm, because when they get that sort of hitchhiker ride at the end credit scene of Intergrade, it's actually with the Chocobo farmer, and obviously they're in the truck with the Chocobo in the back. So I do think we're going to see the Chocobo farm return as well. I think we'll see the Mithril Mines, Junon, the cargo ship, Costa del Sol, Mount Corel, the Gold Saucer. I really hope we see the Gold Saucer, that's like a personal thing for me. Gungaga, Cosmo Canyon, Nibelheim. Again, we pretty much have Nibelheim confirmed, so along with Calm, but I feel like we do need to see Nibelheim. I don't know if we're going to fully go to Nibelheim or if it's just going to be the flashback scene with sort of Cloud and Sephiroth, and then maybe obviously they show the real flashback scene in sort of part 3, we don't know. I think we could also see Rocket Town, Temple of the Ancients, Bone Village, Wutai, since obviously we had a DLC entirely dedicated to Yuffie, and we had lots of things coming up there from Wutai, so I do think we are going to see Wutai. I would be shocked if we don't, or at least get a mention of it, or maybe it's at the start of part 3, but personally I do think with Rebirth we are going to see Wutai, and I think personally Rebirth is going to end with the Forgotten Capital, and obviously that scene with Aerith just afterwards when they get back on the High Wind. We don't even know if the High Wind is going to be in Rebirth, but since that is, in my opinion, such a core part of Final Fantasy VII, I feel like they sort of have to include the High Wind in some way, even if it's just in cutscenes or as like a explorable hub area where you can maybe hang out in a room or something like that. But finally, I'd also like to talk about Crisis Core Reunion. During the 25th anniversary event, we also got a trailer for essentially a remake slash remaster of Crisis Core, which was a PSP game featuring the sort of story of Zack Fair. But with Crisis Core Reunion, with Square Enix games in general, they like to sort of tease the next game at the end of the current game. They do this with Kingdom Hearts, where they tease sort of a spin-off at the end of like a main game, that sort of thing. But personally, at the end of Crisis Core Reunion, I do think we are going to see a trailer for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth or a cutscene, sort of like how Intergrade, the end credit scene, was sort of the setup for the beginning of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Do you think Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is going to be good? Do you think it's going to follow the events of sort of Disc 1 and Disc 2? And do you think it's going to end off with sort of that key scene of Aerith? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!